Hello, everyone, and welcome to actually the kickoff of our first virtual conference. This would have been about a month ago, would have been the 7th annual summit for Conscious Capitalism Rochester. For obvious reasons, we had to pivot a little bit, but we're still really excited to be able to bring this virtual conference to you. And this is the very first edition, but please do join us. I saw many people that signed up that were names that I didn't recognize. So just really briefly about conscious capitalism, it was based on 4 key tenets of having a higher purpose beyond just making profits. These are also companies that have conscious leadership that's really focused on being servant leaders and really living and breathing the principles of their organization. Conscious culture, which really prioritizes the well-being of all the employees of the organization. And then a stakeholder orientation. So rather than prioritizing the stockholders above all, it's how do we balance the needs of the customers, the community, the employees, the environment, our suppliers, really look at that whole ecosystem that surrounds and support our business. And so the movement is an international movement, started from a book called Firms of Endearment in 2007. And conscious capitalism as a movement has been going, again, they also had to cancel their annual conference, but they did a virtual version. And so we took a cue from that, and we are now recording live from anywhere in the world. So we do obviously have a upstate New York focus, but there's a lot of these topics that I think will be of interest to anyone. So as you well know, today we're talking about healing the upstate economy. We have Heather Briccetti from the Business Council of New York, Bob Duffy from the Greater Rochester Chamber, Dr. Seanelle Hawkins from the Urban League of Rochester, and Rob Simpson from Centerstate Economic Opportunity. So we are really trying in this discussion. I'll have a few questions, but I encourage you to throw some questions in the chat as well. I'll try to work them into our discussion, or maybe save some of the audience questions for the end. Just in case anybody has to jump early, I did want to let you know that next week, we do have Raj Sisodia coming, joining us virtually. That'll be on July 8th, again at 3 p.m. And Raj was the one that wrote the original books on Firms of Endearment, and then later Conscious Capitalism, Everybody Matters, Shakti Leadership, and his latest book is called The Healing Organization. And so, interestingly enough, when we were planning our conference and we were planning, in person many months ago when the world was a different place, we were talking about his new book's called The Healing Organization. We were talking about, could we have a summit that was themed the healing organization or the healing force of business? And we were wondering whether that would be too much of a turnoff or seem too squishy to the business audience. But it's only become more necessary, and I think resonates now more than ever in terms of how do we heal our economy from COVID. How do we start to be, as businesses, healing from this epidemic of racism that's been in our community and in our country, really from even before the beginning, and really starting to think about how can business play a positive role. So lastly, I just want to thank our visionary partners, the Accelerate team, CleanCraft, and the Bonadillo Group, and also our sustaining partners at Benefit Link, Home Leasing, Nazareth College, SWBR, 2 Point Capital Management, and Grit Health, who are the ones that are able to make us be able to do this for you and make it free to attend. So thanks to all of them, and thanks to all of our panelists for joining us today. So I just wanted to kick it off, and maybe we'll start with you, Heather, because I know that it has been obviously a difficult time for business and for society, but there's also been some uplifting stories of businesses in crisis that have really shown their true commitment to their employees and stakeholders into this conscious way of doing business. Are there any examples that you've come across in the last couple of months and just all the work that you do? I'd like to start with some positive, uplifting stories, to hopefully inspire and frame the conversation.
Sure. I mean, it would be wrong for me to say this one company or that one company, because so many of the companies did things like, a manufacturer in the capital region shifted their manufacturing to making masks and hospital gowns when they were deemed essential, but what they were making wasn't something that people were, able to go to a store and buy. So there's so many examples of that. There's one example, a local chain of convenience stores, it's a fairly regional, large chain, dealt with, both the crisis and the issue of masks and how do their employees, a lot of whom are teenagers or elderly retirees, deal with people who refuse to wear masks. And at the same time, then social unrest following the murder of George Floyd. And one of their stores was in fact vandalized. And when I was speaking to the CEO of this company, he told me he had just gotten off of a call with store managers. He'd been meeting with them weekly to tell them how to guide their employees in handling this. But he also said, look, if people want to take time off to go to the protests, absolutely let them. This is something that is a right for them. We don't tell them what their beliefs are, and whether or not you're upset about our store being vandalized, let's not conflate these two things. And I thought that was very insightful for someone, and this is literally the day after the store had been vandalized. So when you see leadership like that, it really makes you feel good that, a lot of these companies can navigate anything in a crisis.
That's a great story. Wow. Yeah, that's some consciousness without a doubt. Rob, what about you? Anything out in the Syracuse, Utica area that you've seen that are worth celebrating?
Yeah, I think I think there have been many things. I think one of the really remarkable elements of this entire crisis, the last 16 plus weeks here in upstate New York, I think has been just how closely our community is pulled together in this time of crisis. I mean, early on it was companies, many of our construction firms who were digging deep and donating masks to frontline workers in our hospitals when they were in deep need. And I think now certainly we're seeing more corporate leadership on issues of racial and social justice than I've seen at any point in my lifetime. And that is not to say that we need or don't need more and that it's sufficient, because it's not. However, the very fact that proactively now we are seeing so many business leaders come forward, engage, similar to the story that Heather shared, look not just to offer statements of solidarity and support, but also to think carefully about their own roles in perpetuating an unjust system and how they can be a part of changing that system, to me is a really important indication that this is a unique moment in time for our country and our communities to start to heal.
Yeah, thank you. Well, why don't we go over to Dr. Hawkins? And I know you've been doing a lot of work. You had some really great support that you were able to be able to work with some local organizations that really needed some help during this crisis at the Urban League.
Yeah, the Urban League, we are really proud of our relationships that we were able to garner to support the small business community. One in particular, Key Bank Business Boost and Build, powered by Jumpstart, gave us $100,000 to support small businesses that were impacted by COVID. And so with that, 29 businesses locally received grants of up to $5,000. And that was critical because many of the programs, there were 82 programs that applied. And they were hit by COVID because some were able to take advantage of PPP, but large majority were not because of their infrastructure. We heard that Urban League applied for some funds with New York State ESD, and we were able to get an additional $100,000 to provide some additional supports and one-on-one training, but we provided resiliency training. We partnered with True Fund Financial out in New York City, and 34 businesses participated in these workshops each week to help their businesses pivot. We also are in conversations with a local college right here to talk about one-on-one training, because one of the things that we learned about the businesses really need additional support, not just to pivot, but to work beyond the COVID crisis. And so if there ever came a time where they needed to apply for something like the PPP, they would have those banking relationships. They would also have the infrastructure set up to be successful. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do and respond so quickly to help our businesses. But of course, we still have lots of work to do, but it's been great to see that support.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I read a couple of the press releases, and I know you and I have had the chance to talk a little bit about it, but it's very impressive and it's very needed. And it was very timely. Everything seemed to happen in a quick fashion when it was most needed. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Bob Duffy, I see and talk to you enough, and I see you all around town. I know that you have no problem celebrating things, all things upstate New York. What has been some of your favorite stories, whether in the ways that organizations are, shifting the products that they're making, or the ways that they're really treating their employees? Have there been any standouts to you?
There's been a lot. Like the other panelists, I think we're very proud of the fact that in these crises that we've been living through, people have come together and really just come and it's a great thing about our region, our state, and our country. On the pandemic side, I think we've all gone through a lot of challenges since the beginning of March, but companies have really risen to the occasion. We have a plastics company here that has made thousands of masks, face shields, for hospitals, first responders, nursing homes, and everybody else. And we've have donated those to us, for free. We've given them out for free. We have a CEO of a tech company that gave us like 50 to 60,000 masks donated. It might be closer to 100,000 that we gave our members, but also Adrian Hale from our team went out and hit a lot of churches in the northeast and southwest parts of our city, brought them out, trying to make sure we go outside the walls of a chamber and a business community and really go to the general community. I thought that was just a great act of kindness. And then people they've come together. It really has been fabulous. On the side, I'm going to mention what Rob brought up too, and Heather. We look at the George Floyd situation. And I don't know, having lived through a lot in my life, it seems like it took that to wake people up to an issue that's been going on for a long, long, long time in this country. But I also see that people were repulsed by that, number one. And there's many other instances too, but just as that when it started. But also there is a great feeling of change in the air coming. And, I don't stereotype anybody or anything. It's a matter of getting everybody together and look for how do we make this place better? Acknowledge the weaknesses, acknowledge the problems. And I honestly think we're going to move in that direction very quickly because people want to move. And the one thing I just would say on that issue, it's not so much changing the world and changing our communities. If we can, and each of our organizations, look inside and find those things that, whether it be issues of bias or impediments, change those. If we all kind of clean our own doorstep, we change the world that way. And I think that spirit is really evolving out of this, the pandemic and the crises that we saw. And, I don't look at it as a negative at all. I think it's going to be a very exciting time for our community and our country. And we're going to be much better and much stronger down the road because of it.
Yeah, times of great change also bring great opportunity. And as you mentioned, actually 2 weeks from now, after Raj next week, 2 weeks from now, we'll have Jerome Underwood here to talk with us about, they recently, the Black Agenda Group made a declaration of racism as a public health crisis. And our theme for that day is racism as a public health crisis and a business imperative. I think that businesses really need to be a part of this shift and of this change. And so maybe we'll go in reverse order this time and kick it back to Bob as we're starting to reopen, both from, the pandemic, but also trying to have a way that we can build back in a more equitable way. What are some of the things that you think, obviously social distancing or physical distancing or whatever you want to term it is something that's going to be a part of our normal for a while, but what are some of the things that you're seeing as the economy is reopening? I know you're on some task force with the governor that maybe are opportunities that are out there for our economy.
Well, first of all, I'm not an economist. I am concerned about the economy going forward because once the stimulus funding programs end, not quite sure what that will translate into in terms of job loss and layoffs. So I think that's still to be said. I've heard some people that are really truly economists say 12 to 18 months of pain. Again, don't waste a crisis. I think we have to look at how do we build back, and use the governor's term, build back better. I think we have to look at ways that, first of all, when these things happen, who suffers the most? People in the entry level, maybe the lower ends of the economy or in organizations, they're often the first to go. I think we have to look at a process where we don't disadvantage people any more than they are right now. We're trying to look at that inside with our own membership right now and look at our own organization because like everybody else, we have lost a lot of money. I laid nobody off the last 4 months. And we, I won't get into what our projected losses are this year, but they are astronomical. And I had a finance committee meeting last week, and we're looking through some changes. But I honestly think if we could look for ways to support each other, and if you could do business with your neighbor, do it. And maybe not the neighbor 4 or 5 states away, but the one down the road, the next county, the next region. I think we have to look much more towards supporting each other at home, trying to do business here, help each other out of this. We're all going to be suffering some issues or some losses, but I think trying to find a new way out, and it also fits the issues we talked about, some of the social challenges that we have, that so much emanates around poverty and economics. And, we have to lift every boat up. You can't get ahead if you leave a significant part of your population behind. And we can't forget that. That's why and the issue of seniority and cuts, often people in the lowest end of an organization are first to go. We have to find if we have to make reductions, maybe share that. And I honestly believe here, I wouldn't lay anybody off without cutting my own pay, without doing things inside. We're going to start with management and work our way down. We have to. But I think we have to look for ways to support each other. And I just would close by saying this. Our chamber leaders here will say the same thing. I can't tell you how many times I will call people who do business out of state or across the country when they can find something better, cheaper, and faster down the road. And I think we have to take a look at our suppliers, our supply chains, everything to try and really help this economy, this regional economy, grow. We want our profits to grow, but they have to grow really in connection to the overall community. And I don't think we do that as well as we think. Some do. Wegmans does it very well with a lot of, their suppliers are locally. Ledestri Foods, same thing. But I honestly think we have to encourage everybody to look here and look for ways to pitch in and help. Many hands make light work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being, part of conscious capitalism, I often say is also being that conscious consumer. And how are you voting with your dollars? Whether that's local or I think a big thing actually that's happened. One of the organizations we've partnered with conscious capitalism is Black Young Professionals is actually having a Black Restaurant Week. So next week they have specials going on. If you are in Rochester, I know we do have a spread out audience, but they have a Black Restaurant Week of how can we vote with our dollars, in that respect. And so I wanted to kind of use that as a way, Dr. Hawkins, to say what are some of the ways that you're seeing that we can support more minority and women-owned businesses, or some of the opportunities to kind of build off what Bob was saying in terms of being more conscious consumers.
Yeah. One, I agree with Bob about looking at global supply chains and making sure that we support local businesses first. That's so important. But again, thinking about the collective impact, when we all do this, the impact that we're going to make. I want to bring back the point of, when we think about collective impact and lifting up voices, that's important. And that's one of the things that we've done with the Interrupt Racism campaign in collaboration with Rochester Institute of Technology. It's an opportunity to hear from all community members. So this takes care of equity and power because we're giving everyone an opportunity to speak and provide their ideas for how we change things. How do we make Rochester more equitable? I believe before we get to a pathway for healing, we have to have this opportunity for all voices to be heard. And so if you're not sitting at the table, here's an opportunity for each community member to share their ideas. I know that there are people that just don't believe that they have the power to have their voices heard. Here's an opportunity. When you go to interruptracism.com, you can go to the website, share your ideas on how we can make Rochester more equitable. One of the other things that we have to focus on is not only looking at hearing the voice of the people, but also hearing about how policies have these unintended consequences. When I think about, just for instance, HUD has policy, not one of the, but one of their regulations requires some input of funding in low income communities. absolutely you want to see revitalization in low-income communities, but you also want to see opportunities to build affordable housing in suburban areas. Because if not, you still have that cyclical effect of keeping these impoverished areas. And then you have the school systems that have been broken and still need work. And so you still have this cycle. And so we make this investment to have affordable housing in suburban areas, and people have access to better schools and diversifying the neighborhoods. This is how we begin to make change. But this is an unintended consequence of, thinking that we're doing the right thing. And this is why it's so important to lift all voices so you can hear from the community how this change that you thought might have been a good thing, and maybe was a good thing for some time, but how we have to look at it and see what impact is having on the community now.
Really, really great point, and a lot to think about, and I think a lot of either unlearning to do or assumptions to question, and a lot going forward, as Bob was mentioning earlier. A lot of changes, but also a lot of opportunities as we move forward.
And we see that this is the time people are, as Bob Duffy said, the solidarity statements that we're seeing, people are, and businesses are willing to do the unlearning, and they're willing to do the work. So now is the time for us to seize this opportunity and do our work so we can see that more equitable Rochester that we all believe in.
Amen to that. All right. What about out in the Syracuse area, Rob? I live in Rochester. Syracuse isn't all that far away, although I haven't done a whole lot of, even Syracuse seems like a long way to travel these days when we're all locked down at home. What's the economic, what are things looking like out there?
I think, we've started a slow return to economic activity. I think, fundamentally, though, I agree with Bob. I think that the smart businesses that I'm working with are the ones that understand that this is not a short-term disruption to their business cycle. This is a mid to long-term disruption that probably has, in some cases, permanent impacts to their business models, and that they need to adapt and plan for that. I think, we're certainly seeing a return to a level of commercial and retail activity that is picking up. I was just at the office earlier this week, and the number of people downtown walking around is slowly returning. I think the challenge, though, as we work hard to try to get our economy back open again, I think there's a really important balance that we strike. And I think organizations like ours have a responsibility to lead in this conversation around not just getting businesses reopened, but being in a position where we can keep them open. We're looking at what's happening around the country, and I don't know, I won't speak for everyone else, but I watch it with astounding alarm. The challenges associated with reimposing lockdowns are going backward, psychologically, emotionally, economically, are terrifying to me. The impact that we've seen, the shock to our collective economic system, the number of people who are displaced, out of work, families impacted, is already astounding, and we can't afford to go backward in that conversation. In that respect, I really applaud the leadership of the governor in taking a slow and data-driven and cautious approach. It's difficult because business owners do want to get back to normal. I think that the challenge is that, getting back right now isn't normal. There's nothing normal about going back to an office space and everyone having to wear a mask, or having new sanitization protocols, or only being able to put 4 people in a conference room that used to hold 20. So going back to normal isn't an option right now. And I think figuring out how we keep our economy moving through this period that we now know is a prolonged period of uncertainty is the next pivot that we all need to make. We help people understand who could be open and who had to close down. We help people understand federal stimulus programs. We help people figure out reopening. And now we have to figure out how to help them stay open safely and keep our communities safe, or we're going to really, truly see economic suffering on a scale we couldn't possibly experience before.
Yeah. The uncertainty in a lot of cases is the toughest part. The opening, reopening. Sometimes when it's, especially for restaurants, maybe, and if they're buying all this food to restock everything and then they have to close down again, all those costs that get imposed each time is definitely a challenge. And so, Heather, I'm really grateful for you to join this panel, but I think that some people may not know about the Business Council. So you're giving us this broader perspective beyond just each of our our individual cities here. So tell us a little bit first about what the Business Council does and advocates for, and then kind of in that broader context, what you're seeing statewide in terms of reopening.
Sure. Well, so the Business Council is a combination of the State Chamber of Commerce and the State Manufacturers Association. So we are a membership-based organization. All of our members have one thing in common, and that's they are employers. So our membership includes higher education, utility companies, grocery store chains, food producers, you name it, restaurants and beer manufacturers. So we're all over the map, and our membership is, I would say, there are vast differences between those that were deemed essential businesses and were able to continue operations and those that were not. And so I've been talking to our members throughout this and talking to the governor's office and trying to guide my members, and also taking ideas from our employers and sharing them with government as to what a new manufacturing floor would look like, for example, or how do you deal with an office building where everyone comes in via an elevator? I mean, these are things that we haven't thought about. In the long term, we'll all be better off for it. But I do see some lasting changes that are, businesses are very good at navigating these things, but they have to have at least the ability to do business, right? Some of the lasting impacts are going to be, now that everyone's been working from home, what happens to the commercial real estate sector? Because a lot of us, and myself included, are realizing, we don't need all the office space that we have. And certainly in a time of declining revenue, I mentioned I'm a dues-based organization. The dues are based on businesses being in business and also based on how many employees they have. So if there's layoffs, what I get in terms of revenue goes down if it doesn't evaporate. So we need to figure out what does the new workplace look like, and what is the role an organization like mine can play in assisting employers in setting it up, and what are the work rules, and how do you deal with labor and employment issues. I know there's a lot of complications. I've been amazed at first how many of our members are saying, look, we don't want to be the first ones to be open and in the door because we don't want to put our employees at risk. We want them to feel safe in the workplace, and we're going to be more flexible in terms of working from home. But does a 9-to-5 day make sense anymore? And are there things that we can do in terms of sharing childcare or job sharing or flexible hours that were not even on our radar before? So we're in for a long period of, I think, seismic change. Some of it is going to be valuable. Some of it's going to be very painful. The businesses that are creative, which so many of them are going to get through it just fine, probably with some growing pains. But it's really an interesting time to be talking to all these members and figuring out and seeing really how different it is. If you were open this whole time, it's a very different experience than if you're, say, a hotel or a wedding venue where, you have to figure out things like, how do you deal with dancing? I mean, there are so many things that you have to think about now that we haven't thought about. And what's going on nationally is very scary. And if there's one thing the business community should do is, let's take all the politics out of this mask wearing business. Masks work. They do stop the spread. Everyone should be wearing a mask if they're in a position where they're going to be within 6 feet of another person. And businesses should be saying, hey, states, can we all make this clear that this is the rule, so that our poor employees, the teenagers and the senior citizens who are working in retirement, aren't dealing with confronting people who just don't want to wear it because they think it's their right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. I'm wondering, as we're looking then at some of those, as you're mentioning, there's going to be some painful times, but some changes and some opportunities. Is there any way that you see Upstate specifically, like the strengths of Upstate, or are there any things that make us well positioned to move into this new time?
Yeah, so this is my like new big project, and I'm going to be, everyone on this phone is going to end up having to spend some time with me on the phone because I'm trying to put together a sort of short and long-term plan for New York's recovery, but building off of our strengths. We have a legacy in manufacturing. We have a robust paper industry. Why can't we manufacture PPE in New York? We have a legacy pharmaceutical industry. Why can't we manufacture pharmaceutical here again rather than overseas? We used to have a really strong medical device sector. These are all industries that we've got experience, we've got facilities, and we certainly have the talent. How do we put our heads together and create the right set of incentives to repatriate some of this and repatriate it to New York, where we've got everything in place, so let's take advantage of it. And I left out one piece, and I'm sorry I'm talking too much, but we also manufacture chips in New York. And throughout this, there was a huge supply chain issue with getting technology, finished technology, in particular to students, but also to employees. There was a long wait time for laptops and iPads. We make the chips here. So what do we need to do to complete the product in New York? I mean, we've got proximity, we've got the people. Let's figure that out too, because that is going to be a huge part of our future. Everyone is going to need the ability to be remote.
Yeah, great point. Now, Rob, is there anything out in Syracuse? Obviously, in some ways we each have our distinct economies. In some ways, we are a bit of a block here in upstate New York. But are there any specific ways that you see either some of your individual members or some of your industries that are well positioned or that have an opportunity for this kind of whatever new normal looks like?
Yeah, I think so. We have, I think we're really fortunate. We have a preponderance of food manufacturers here in this part of upstate New York, as does much of upstate New York. And I think back to the comment about Bob was talking about earlier about the possibility of reshoring supply chains. I think in this crisis, we've identified a handful of really critical industries, whether it's medical devices and pharmaceuticals, certainly food, critical components of manufacturing, where the vulnerability and susceptibility to globalized supply chains creates frankly a national risk. And so, I think those are certainly things that we are actively working on and pursuing strategies to help us think through how we might begin to stabilize those supply chains, bring more back here to central New York. I also think that there is in addition to there being a significant number of opportunities for us in upstate New York, I think there are also some existential threats that we need to be very honest about and think really carefully about how we can address. And I think, primarily about higher education and healthcare in our state. These are massive and major employers. Every single one of our communities in upstate New York literally depends on the income that is generated, the sales tax generated from students who don't live here, who come here, the jobs that are produced. And these institutions are in a dire position in this moment for two reasons. Well, one, because of the uncertainty about the ability for students to come back. And two, because of the very real challenges, both practical challenges and legal issues associated with what happens if they can bring students back. And I think this is a topic, frankly, that Heather and I haven't yet talked about, but is on my list for her. I really think that we need some statewide solutions on this front. We need to be able to show parents and students that coming to school in New York State can be a remarkably safe experience. And we need a system of testing, of PPE, of contact tracing that is second to none anywhere in the world if we're going to be able to convince people that it is safe to send their students into higher education in New York State. And I think if we cannot figure out how to do that, many of our communities, particularly our smaller towns and villages where there may be a small private school, I think of several places here just in my region, if those schools go under, those communities lose their major center of employment and culture, and that's simply an unacceptable situation.
Yeah. There's for a long time, part of the strength of our economy has been the eds and meds, and I think in some ways that's been great for us. It's been counter-cyclical sometimes, but in this particular environment can be a challenge. Now, Dr. Hawkins, I know that there's so many different programs that the Urban League has in terms of workforce development, in terms of, business development services for entrepreneurs. Are you seeing a spike in people that want to jump into some of those services and maybe start their own businesses? Are there opportunities for that, or is it too soon? What are some of the things that you're seeing as we're reopening as maybe some of those opportunities?
That's a great question. We aren't seeing a spike yet, but I'm hopeful that as we continue to think about retraining and retooling, and we think about what are the good things that have come from COVID, and how can we prepare those programs, particularly in our workforce development programs in the trades, as people are aging out, and making sure that we take advantage of that with building and skill building. Additionally, what can we do with technology? I heard Rob and Heather talk about, the new normal, right? Or what can we take from the new normal and use as opportunities to build businesses? And so as we're providing this training at the Urban League, we're inviting people to think about that idea that you've had sitting in the pit of your belly. Now it's time to birth it. There are lots of opportunity with funding to do that. So we're supportive of it, but we're listening to the community to hear, what other things. But I think there needs to be some funding for some retraining and retooling so that we can focus on technology and continue to make the advances that we have made during the COVID-19 crisis.
And then Bob, is there things that you're seeing in Rochester? I mean, you also have this with the being involved with the governor's reopening task force. You also have a bit of this statewide view of things, but where are you seeing opportunities for moving forward?
First of all, the control room, my new title is Manager of Complaints for the Finger Lakes region. So that's become my new job over the last few months. I agree with all the comments made by the panelists. Some things I'm thinking of here too. First of all, what can we do to draw and attract upstate? And we're all upstaters. And I do think some of it is the lack of density, the affordability, the ease of travel. If we lived in the 5 boroughs, and I've never lived in New York City. I've worked there. I've had an office there. I've been in traffic there. But you look at what we offer up here in terms of just really the diversity of geography and topography all throughout upstate is one area I think is a big attraction. And I could not imagine being in a high-rise apartment room for 3 months during a pandemic, not being able to leave, couldn't even walk down or take an elevator down to sit on my front porch steps, as opposed to we have a different reality here. So I think that is a big draw. I think we have I agree with the comments, a highly educated workforce, great education systems that, although they're challenged with coming back to reopening, I do think they will reopen in the fall. There may be some differences how they look, but it's coming. But let me take a little different level here. I think we have to conserve money, and it's a very tough topic, but I think we should look to consolidate. I'll speak for Rochester. Why can't we have a metro government and a metro school district? Save money, have more money for kids. Come up with a way to fix that, to look for ways that we could save money. In the not-for-profit industry, the Urban League is one of the premier not-for-profits leaders here. My whole time in Rochester, maybe many of those come underneath the Urban League, and we find ways to not shed jobs, but to increase effectiveness and save money and expand services. Another thing too, I think, I'm not sure if it was Heather or Rob said earlier, in terms of politics, I think it's time to get off the political positions, tough in a presidential or election year. But I'll give you an example of what I go crazy with. I can't speak for the panelists. I think I would understand this. We're probably all in the same category. We're not millionaires. So when we talk about millionaires' taxes, here's how I see it. As opposed to a very cool, trendy political tagline, let's tax the rich. Well, the rich have an ability to be very mobile. And where do they go? They go to Florida, South Carolina, offshore. They take their money and go elsewhere. Maybe a different view is maybe lower their taxes here with a responsibility to have them give back philanthropically. Okay, you have a lower tax rate, but you have a choice, a menu of options here to invest in children, schools, whatever. And I honestly think people who are very wealthy for the most part are philanthropists, but we lose them. And there are probably more millionaires in one block in New York City than there is in the entire Finger Lakes region. But when they leave, and there's many up here who have left already, and they spend 6 months in a day someplace else, they take their money and their assets and investments with them. Why not try and keep them here, but give them a menu of options to give, not skate, because taxes go to government for the most part. Why not pick areas that are the highest priority? It could be job training, job preparation, education, mentoring. This whole issue of our social changes. They could take a lead role and invest very heavily up here, as opposed to leaving and going to a different state and investing down there. I think this is the time of great social change, great economic change. We can't actually, maybe the thinking that got us here, we can't keep those same behaviors going to get out of it. We need to think differently and act differently. And this is a great time for economic and social change. And we really can be bold and brave. But I'll say this, I think I'm the only one on the call that's been an elected official. Mike Bloomberg had a great quote about elected officials. What are the 3 priorities of every elected official? Number 1, to get reelected. Number 2, to get reelected. Number 3, go figure. So a lot of people in elected office are afraid to make bold statements, take bold positions for fear of upsetting the apple cart and not getting reelected. I think, first of all, we have to get out of that mindset and look, how do we come together? How can we better serve our constituents? Because we're going to be heading towards some rough waters ahead. And there's a lot of arguments for and against. I mentioned consolidation. Is that the only answer? No. But there are things we could do so differently. And I'll speak for Rochester. We are a very segregated community. We have been for a long time. That has to stop. That is pockets of poverty. And I think it's not just a matter of someone's fault. I think the engineering that got us to this point has to be re-engineered to get us out. And I'm talking about a whole scale look. We have a mayor and a county executive who I believe have a very good relationship, personally and professionally. I think it's a great time, but for a state, we have to get out of this malaise. And I honestly think the upstate regions, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, that Albany, I think we all have unique opportunities to create much more change. We're not New York City. New York, to me, what happens in New York City and what they need is probably different than up here. But we should be bold. We should really show leadership. And honestly, feel for Rochester, we're the home of Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. I think we should be just jumping at this opportunity for change and be proud of what we do going forward.
Perfect. Well, you've actually led a little bit into a few of the questions that we're getting from the audience. I'm going to combine questions from Vin and from Karen. So thanks so much for sending them in. Vin says that Bobby remembers your predecessor saying that there's 30,000 economic development agencies in the U.S. competing for the same big employers. And how does the upstate New York and maybe the Rochester area or elsewhere, how do we differentiate ourselves and how maybe can business leaders help? And then Karen kind of adds that she's seen an increase of businesses coming to upstate New York and wonders whether the risks of kind of being in those major metro areas, and as you were mentioning, some of the density there could be one of the ways that we do differentiate ourselves in terms of having a little bit more space.
Great question. First of all, I think we can compete with price, with quality, with educated workforce, with anybody. A lot of our economic development victories, I speak in our region, come because of New York State investments. I mean, Governor Cuomo has been tremendous in this region. When he gets criticized, I throw my hands up because I'm not aware of any governor who's put more money into a region than this governor has. So that is one area. Number 2, one of the best recruiters we have are other businesses. So the Danny Wegmans and Rob Sands of the world and others are great recruiters for other businesses. They are worldwide global names. As opposed to somebody from a chamber, GRE, or an economic development agency, Empire State Development. I think we need to really have our business leaders jump in. And third, I think getting our college grads, all of us are in the midst of communities with great higher education. When our graduates look to go to East or West Coast, and I'll tell you what drives the future? Talent. Companies come and go for the talent. So as you or I, if we're coming out of you and Cornell, me at RIT, going to our undergrad days, and we want to go to the West Coast. And we get offered $100,000 to go, you and I together, to go out and work in Silicon Valley. Sounds great until we get there and start paying our rent and the cost of living. Maybe $80,000 here in Rochester, we live like kings compared to what we would be in the West Coast. And I think we need to get young people thinking that staying here, buying a house, affordability, transportation, your dollars can go so much farther. And if they still want to move, maybe say, hey, give us a thought, go away for 2 or 3 years, then come back. Because I honestly think talent is going to rule. And all of us here on this call, on this panel, we are all around great talent coming out of our school systems right now in our communities, but they tend to leave for what they call greener pastures. And I think we have to turn that around and keep them here and quit focusing on the negative, focus on the positives.
Rob, is there anything that you're seeing out in Syracuse? Is it a similar story, or is there any other ways that you're trying to differentiate?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think the analogy is an interesting one. 30,000 economic development agencies all trying to go after the same thing. So, from my perspective, part of our strategy is to not go after the same thing. I think we have a slightly different approach to economic development, even than some of our peers in the state. I'm not going to say it's necessarily better, but it is, it's really rooted in data. At the end of the day, all of the information suggests that, across the country, no more than 2% of any metro's gross change in GDP comes from attracting new businesses from other places. Now, we all love those projects. They make for great headlines. We had one here in Syracuse amidst the greatest economic downturn in any of our lifetimes when we landed 1,000 jobs from Amazon building a 4 million square foot warehouse. We're going to celebrate that every time. However, the vast majority of our resources are invested in working with our companies that are already here. With our locally owned companies, with our family owned businesses, mining their relationships and their supply chains and doing what we can to not take those folks who have made doing business in New York State, part of their ethos, and not taking them for granted. So I think that is a fundamental way that we try to differentiate ourselves, which is to capture more of that organic growth than we might otherwise if we were distracted chasing leads that all 30,000 agencies are chasing. The second thing I think that we feel very strongly about, and I know my peers around the state do as well, is investing in entrepreneurship and innovation. With all of the academic institutions that we've talked about across upstate New York, the potential to build and create and nurture and sustain an innovation ecosystem in upstate and across the state is really incredible. We've certainly seen the positive results from that here in central New York over the course of the last decade, where we've been investing heavily in that ecosystem, and an entrepreneurial set of rankings that had us in the 134th out of 150 15 years ago, where we're now catapulting ourselves into the top third of communities in terms of being able to generate new businesses, and that is going to be something that has both a wealth creation positive impact for our community, but it's also a great story for our communities to rally around. We all celebrate those brands and those businesses that have been built and become family names and corporate names on buildings throughout our communities, and reinvesting in that next wave of businesses that can be our future anchor employers, to me, is a critically important strategy.
Kind of building off that, Karen had kind of a follow-up question for you, Robin, maybe for Heather as well. Getting that big announcement of the Amazon distribution center, what businesses have you seen that kind of grow around that? Or are there ways that can be a hub for more activity and investment for our area?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're already experiencing a number of other transportation, logistics, and warehousing opportunities that since that announcement have been knocking on our door. And frankly, I think in some respects they let a company like Amazon do the initial research to validate the market and the reasons and the transportation systems, and they come in on the back end and build smaller facilities. So we have a number of those deals that we're working. We're also working hard to try to make sure that our local businesses, whether it's our contractors, whether it's our MWBEs, are in a position to become vendors to such a massive facility. I mean, it's a $350 million project, 4 million square feet. And then the third component, going back to my previous statement, is Part of Amazon's last mile distribution model involves a network of private carriers. And so there's an opportunity for people in our community right now to build businesses around logistics, fleet management, and so many other places that didn't exist even just a couple of months ago before this announcement. So, we're already seeing the economic spin-off effect, and I suspect that that's going to continue for quite a while.
Great, thank you. What about from your perspective, Heather? Karen was wondering too, in addition to some of that, maybe trying to build off of that Amazon success, also just thinking about the universities, about the manufacturers, some of the fourth industrial revolution types of opportunities that were already out there, and in a lot of ways, things that we've seen, whether because everybody's forced to work from home or any number of different things, that some of those changes that were coming slowly have been accelerated. Are there ways for us to leverage that for Upstate?
Yeah, I mean, so if you have the essential infrastructure, and not all of Upstate has it, if you have broadband, access to broadband, you can work remotely, you can work anywhere in the state. So, I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity for Upstate. I grew up in Syracuse, it's a beautiful city. It's got a lovely downtown area and parks around it. And I mean, the countryside outside of the city is beautiful. There's not a real awareness of this. I think all of Upstate probably needs a really good therapist, because we always talk about how awful the weather is. I like snow, but not everyone does. But the fastest growing state in the country in terms of population before all this happened was like South Dakota. I mean, no one raves about the weather or the climate in South Dakota. There's other reasons for it. And it's having opportunity, but having the infrastructure, getting that in place, having higher education as an entrepreneurial resource, which it is and has evolved to become, particularly, I think, in Rochester, you see that, RPI here in Troy, I'm sure Syracuse University as well. They've become centers of innovation that if we can spin businesses off and convince people to stay there, to grow their businesses there, we could see some real success. And the lure of the densely populated urban areas, I think that trend we're gonna see some reversal. Less than 6 months ago, I was at an event where, an urban planner, developer person asserted as a matter of fact that 90% of the population was gonna live in highly dense urban areas by 2030. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think people are gonna be rethinking that. And it's especially compelling if you can work remotely. But we need broadband, we need to, like I said, present ourselves as an attractive alternative. That's something that I think Upstate hasn't done particularly well. Maybe I missed, I think the I Love New York ads are very good, but, I think the cities have a lot to offer, and the small towns and villages along Route 20, Route 5, there's so many beautiful places that look like mini Brooklyn neighborhoods in these legacy downtown areas. You've got all the infrastructure there. You've got water and sewer and electric and hopefully broadband. So sorry, I kind of answered your question, I think.
No, appreciate it.
I was thinking that one of the things that we're missing is a campaign to bring our students home. We're thinking about just the Urban League. We have all of our Black Scholars. We actually have our Black Scholars event on July 8th. But I haven't seen from New York a campaign to bring our students back home when they go off to college, come back home. We talk about all of the benefits of living in upstate New York, living in Rochester, making the investments in our community. Urban League, we're investing in $12 million project that's coming, a lease to purchase program where individuals can live in a home for 15 years. In the last 5 years, they can work on the home ownership piece. So at the end of year 20, they own the home. And those are things that we need to do. Let the community members, let the students know that here are all these opportunities in Rochester and specifically upstate New York that are available to you where you don't have to go away. You can get your education, but then come back home so that we can do the work here. So there we create diverse neighborhoods, better school systems. We got a new superintendent, Dr. Maya Small. I'm excited about her leadership. There's lots of opportunity, and we just need a campaign. So let's get that going.
I'm with you there. Actually, that's one of the things, part of our vision for Conscious Capitalism Rochester is really to say, if this has a positive impact on the bottom line for companies, these more purposeful, stakeholder-driven companies, it has a positive impact on the bottom line. It has a positive impact on retention and recruitment because more and more people want to work for those types of companies. So we really think that conscious capitalism principles can be an economic development strategy for our region because, especially with young people, more and more are looking to have a more purposeful career. And so, some of those things are real opportunities. But the other question I wanted to ask you, Dr. Hawkins, was around, many of the other panelists were talking about not just trying to get the big win, the big deal of, stealing a company from another region, but really, how do we start to whether through entrepreneurship or through small businesses, help them to kind of grow organically, the ones that we already have. And is there anything, I know that you do many programs at the Urban League, but is there anything that you're seeing specifically that are either things that are being taken advantage of or gaps that you're seeing in that ecosystem that we could still work on?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're seeing small businesses grow, but there has to be a focus on making sure that small businesses are set up for success, right, beyond any crisis. And that's one of the things that we've seen, that we need to really not slow down, but take a step back and make sure that the infrastructures are in place, making sure that there are policies that act as barriers. If there are policies that act as barriers for the small businesses, that we can disband those policies so that we can get the small businesses the support that they need. So Urban League, we have an entrepreneurship program. We provide services for individuals with disabilities, our youth services. And I think one piece that's missing is continuing to support the youth, providing them those skills and thinking about entrepreneurship so we can have a system, an incubator system with our youth. And so we're looking at that, and we're looking for communities to support those efforts because the kids have lots of ideas, especially related to technology and fashion and mask making and things like that. So we have to think about the incubator systems that we can create through the individuals that we're currently serving. So the youth are an opportunity for us, as you already know.
Andrew, if I could just jump in with something?
Please.
Just following the doctor's comments, one thing I found in my career here in Rochester is the lack of venture capital up here. So an outside the box idea, I go back to my first point, with our wealthiest taxpayers, what if they weren't forced to leave the state with raising their taxes, but a percentage they were committed to having to support business, venture capital businesses, and maybe those profits get reinvested, not go back to the corporations, but as profits reinvest in those programs. A lot of these businesses don't have the capital to start off or the help and expertise. And that's, again, just saying raise taxes. Why not focus those investments in areas that really make a difference? Because I think listen, raising taxes, having been in government, it goes to government for the most part, and then it's distributed. Why not direct investments in our communities with those high earners, keep them here year round and keep them investing? And I think that could make a huge difference, but we can't keep going down the same path, doing things the same way, because we need a whole different way of thinking and acting going forward.
And I think you make a really good point when we talk about reimagining Rochester. Those are things that we need to do. I think one of the disadvantages of being a small nonprofit is many people don't know all of the services that we provide. So I guess I challenge you, Bob, to think about, maybe not just you, but all of us, to think about how can we share that information so we can break down these silos and work better together and work smarter, because we have the infrastructure at the Urban League. We're small. If we had a funder to say, hey, invest in X, we could possibly do that if it's one of our service areas. And if it's not, then there is another nonprofit that's doing that. But we have these systems. Instead of recreating the wheel, we can reimagine it and work better together. So I'm looking forward to the start of that. I also think you should fill out our survey at interruptracism.com, because you've said several great ideas, and I'm just like, why hasn't he filled out our survey?
No, right now.
That actually kind of that reimagining is really where I wanted to spend our last 15 minutes together, because I really just wanted to talk about how do we make sure, you know, as the governor has called it, you build back better, you know, as we're going into this new normal, trying to make it a better normal. I think that even before this crisis, the challenges, the kind of twin challenges, both of racial and economic inequality, and then also the sustainability aspect, are probably two of the greatest challenges that we're facing in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of intersectionality of those two as well, where Ram actually has been a longtime conscious capitalism member, and with Larson Engineers does a lot of green building, and he's kind of talking about the intersectionality. He had a question around, you know, in Rochester specifically, the low to medium income communities need some transformation of their living environment. You know, bringing justice to these people is part of their living environment. You know, not having the food deserts. You know, offering green jobs. How do we build back better? Build back better, both more inclusively and also building back better more sustainably. Is there anything, Dr. Hawkins, and then I'll go around the panel again just to see if there's anybody that thinks, you know, what are some of whether policy changes or some of the business leaders that are listening, something that businesses can do specifically to support that?
Yeah, and I've had these conversations with Ron. We've talked about this. Number one, when we even just think about where we're positioned, the Urban League, we're across the street from the train station and bus station. This is the first entry point for people. It's not a beautiful look, right? And if we want to attract people to Rochester, why don't we work on beautifying that central point where people come in? And so it's a change of mindset, thinking about the neighborhoods and having these big fields of nothing, where we can invest in education in our youth so that we can have our own systems of creating, developing food for our community. So it's again, like I said, going back to reimagining Rochester, making those investments, having those community conversations, because I'm sure many people, when I've mentioned this before, they're like, hey, I didn't think about how that area is a central point and we haven't focused on beautifying. I haven't even thought about why that field is empty and we could be growing food to help sustain neighborhoods and help teach children about agriculture. And so those are opportunities that we just, now that we have been on pause, we have taken the time to look and focus, we need to start acting on those things now. So I agree with Ron, absolutely.
Thank you. Why don't I kick it down to Heather? Heather, is there anything from your perspective, either policy-wise, things that you're advocating for, things that maybe you're seeing opportunities for businesses to kind of help tackle some of these issues for our communities?
Yeah, I mean, I could spend the next hour talking about all of it, but I'll just touch on a few. Bob mentioned something that I think is that we all need to really think about, and that's consolidation and creating more, recognizing that we have regional economies, that each local municipality, there is a lot of duplication going on. We could have a more thoughtful approach to where we allocate our resources, and probably have some smoothing out of things like school resources, where you have pockets of wealth immediately next to pockets of poverty. And as hard as the state tries to equalize the funding between the two, it never quite is able to accomplish that because of the way that our system has been built. This is a moment for all of us to think about all of that. There are so many policies that we could talk about, and again, I'm not going to go through all of them other than to suggest that anything that we can do that can encourage startups, entrepreneurs, and people to start small businesses, and including making grant funding available for things like facades in impoverished areas or in blighted areas. There's a lot of local economic development corporations that run programs like that. I think they're going to be very cash strapped for several years probably. But if we can encourage people to think of this as an opportunity to start their own business where they live in a food desert, what you have a need, you have an existing need right there that is identifiable. So you need to find the right people who are willing to, take a little risk, and maybe we think about public-private partnerships for those kinds of endeavors, or a venture capital stake, with part of that stake being governmental. Those are the kind of things that we ought to be talking about, because we do have the opportunity here to build back better. But I'll go back to the one thing that I think is so important. We have to make sure that everyone has access to broadband, has the essential infrastructure to start a business. Because if you're in a very poor rural area in parts of New York, you might want to start your own online business, but you can't do it without internet. It's just not happening. So.
Thanks. Yeah. So Bob and Rob, Rob, I'll start with you. But I'm just curious from the positions that you sit in your chambers. Are you seeing that businesses are eager to take this on? Because I truly believe that if we do tackle these challenges, both of inequality and of more sustainability, it is a job creator. It does help our whole region. But sometimes it does feel like it's difficult to get people to either think that long term or think that kind of holistically. Sometimes how do you try to move your members and the business owners that you come across in that direction, or are they already eager to go there?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of eagerness to go there. I think a lot of the comments that have been made about sort of reimagining, I wholeheartedly agree with. And I think on the broadband issue, it's a problem, believe it or not, in urban areas too. And in some cases it's broadband, but it's other forms of digital access that create real challenges for people to participate in a remote work economy that we have to solve. It's unfair, it's unequal, and it perpetuates a set of disequal outcomes. Business, it's interesting. I was looking at some polling data this morning, and I mean, this is not a happy statistic, but it's an interesting one. Two of the national public opinion polls that came out this morning showed that 75% of the people in this country believe that the country's on the wrong track. Okay, I do not remember a moment in my lifetime when 75% of the people in America agreed on anything. And I think that is part of what gives me hope in this moment, is that there is such a recognition that we need to do things differently than what we are doing now, that it is no longer sustainable for us to expect that a set of racial and social injustices that have been swept under the rug for so long are going to produce a positive and sustainable outcome for our society. And it goes on through the discussions around the pandemic. So I see business leaders who recognize the challenges of the moment we're in, who understand that their participation in the solutions is both a moral and social, but also an economic imperative. And I think this is what brings it back to me to conscious capitalism. Never in this country has the role and the power of business leaders and those in corporate boardrooms been more pronounced than it is in this moment, because we have so many elected officials who have flat out abdicated their responsibility to lead. And so the opportunity for business right now is to provide no quarter to racial and social injustice or hate, to provide real and meaningful solutions, and to recognize that some of the problems that they have been facing in managing this shift to remote work were problems even before COVID. I think about childcare in particular. I've heard more business leaders talk about childcare challenges over the course of the last 3 months than I did over the last 3 years. But I hate to tell you, childcare issues were and always have been one of the major barriers to access into employment, particularly for women and individuals of color. So heeding those lessons, the things that we are seeing now that are really hurting our communities, and making sure that as we begin the reopening, as we return to some form of normalcy, that we don't forget those things. I truly believe that this is the age for business leaders to take over that mantle of leadership. And that is not to say there's not a role for public and elected officials, but I think more so than ever, the power of business to act and to lead is one of the things that really gives me a lot of enthusiasm for what the next few years could look like.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, that certainly fires me up, and it gets me excited for next week, because that's what Raj is all about, is talking about really that healing force of business. But before I just kind of wrap us up, I'll give Mr. Duffy there the last word to talk about what you see as the opportunities there.
Rob made a great point about business leaders and other leaders. Too often we rely on politics and political leaders, and we have some great ones at all levels. We also have many who don't lead effectively, who divide, who end up creating bigger schisms in our communities and our country. This is a time to come together. This is a time to look for ways to really fix some of the issues. it kind of mystifies me that it takes basically the murder of a citizen in Minneapolis to all of a sudden have people wake up that we have issues of race and problems in this country that have been going on for hundreds of years. But we're at a moment of time where I think we can really make great progress. We have to talk about it. I go back to Stephen Covey. I'm a big fan of the 7 Habits. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. We have to listen to the voices. People that demonize groups, it drives me crazy. Listen, if changes are not evolutionary, then they are revolutionary. And what you see here, as an old saying, you get the riots that you deserve. And so these things are just examples of anger that we see, and it's time for change. And I do think business leaders, their success is predicated upon financial success, customers, earning money. When you have times like this, it's not good for business. So I do think they are great leaders. Also, elected officials look for money to get re-election. I would not give a nickel to an elected official that did not carry out what I thought was important. You should support people that really have your vision, and really believe and lead in the way you want. And the last thing I would say on this, politics should not be a career. And that's half the problems in our country. To come out of college and be in politics for 40 years, it's really not a good thing for the people that you serve, because you don't have some of the maybe experiences other people have. Everybody going into office, anybody listening who want to run for office, I've actually counseled some candidates on this. If you want to run for office, and it was not something I ever intended to do before I did it, you should go with the thought of being a one-termer. I'm going to go in for 2 years or 4 years. I'm going to change things. And I don't care if I get reelected. I'm going to do the right thing. If everybody had that mentality and throw in term limits, because I do not believe voters control term limits. Voters don't vote. A good election is 30% of people showing up. I honestly think 2 terms, no more than 3, 2.5, a certain amount of time, you should do your duties and get out and make room for somebody else. Because what happens, people get in and they are entrenched. You do not want to make the tough decisions or lead to get out. And that's where I do think the business community, other leadership has to step up. We're at a great point in time. I mean, I'm actually excited about where we are right now, because we are going to see changes that will make us better and stronger in the future and not leave people behind. But if we let politics rule, you're not going to consolidate. You're not going to open up, because people get in office, and I'll tell you what, at a whole lot of levels, based on reinforcing certain beliefs. If we want change, we should demand it, not in a commercial, not in rhetoric, in actions. And for all the mailers and money that gets spent on PR, I'm sorry, folks. It's lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I think at this point here, we have a lot of people in the wings that, quite frankly, if people don't want to lead, they can step in and will do great service locally, statewide, and nationally. And I just think we should encourage people to do that and hold people accountable once you get in. But let's not miss this opportunity, this crisis. Let's make the best of it, come out stronger, not more divided, come out more united, stronger, and we don't leave anybody behind with what I hope will be an economic surge in the next couple of years.
Wonderful. Well, I can't think of a better way to leave it, and also just to lead us into next week. So thank you to Bob Duffy, to Dr. Seanelle Hawkins, to Heather Briccetti, and to Rob Simpson for joining us today to talk about healing the upstate economy. And really, thanks to all of you who tuned in. And if you enjoyed it, we will be sending out a link to see the video, and also releasing it as a podcast if you'd like to share it with anyone. And also keep in mind that next week, same time, same place, if you're signed up for this webinar, you'll get the information to join us next week to talk with Raj Sisodia about healing organizations and his vision for that. The following week on the 15th, again, Wednesday at 3 p.m., will be Racism as a Public Health Crisis and a Business Imperative. The following week, we'll be talking about building a more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. And on the 29th, also at 3 p.m., we'll be talking about corporate cultures that are healing organizations. And so it should be a lot of great discussions. I really appreciated the panelists and everything that they had to share. Rob shared in the notes there to check out goodlifecny.com to see some cool things that are going on and some celebrations of what's going on in the region. And Dr. Hawkins also added that interruptracism.com is also a place where there's really an opportunity to lift up and hear all of these voices, to get some data and get some incentive and some interest in what's going on now so that we can figure out the best way to build back better, and to make sure that this new normal is going to be a better normal. So thank you all for joining us today, both panelists and attendees, and hope to see you next week.
Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you.